upset that I cannot fall in love, but I guess this avoids the stress of falling out of it. Are you tired of sick right now, but I expect maybe I will fly us out of here. Cut my hair to make you stare. I'll hide my chest and I'll figure out a way to get us out of here. Sometimes it ain't one day, 'cause I can feel ghosts and blues wrapping my head, but I don't wanna fall asleep just yet. My eyes went dark. I don't know where.
15 seconds.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
So you were saying you replaced Mike Baker?
Yeah, Mike's a great guy. He was a good officer. He was, he doesn't really talk about his work. Maybe it's been years have passed, but he was the real deal. I replaced him in Athens. He's done a lot of Athens was a tough place. At the time, the American government spent more money on security in Athens than they spent anywhere else in the world, including Beirut.
Why?
It was a combination of two things. There were two indigenous Greek groups that were exceedingly dangerous. One was called Revolutionary Organization 17 November. They had killed the CIA station chief, two U.S. defense attachés, just bad guys all around. The other was called Popular Revolutionary Struggle. And then on top of that, you had Abu Nidal, the Libyans, the PFLP, the PFLP-GC, the DFLP. Everybody was there because there was this informal agreement between the Greek government of Andreas Papandreou at the time and these terrorist groups that if you don't kill Greeks, we'll leave you alone.
Oh boy.
Yeah. But killing Americans wasn't part of the deal, so it was every man for himself.
Wow. Your story is pretty nuts, man.
Yeah,
And your story of getting in trouble and eventually going to prison for something that was what they were doing, what you reported on, was completely illegal, and you were completely honest about it. And it was essentially about the U.S. torture program.
right.
Tell us how this all started. How long had you been involved in the CIA?
Oh, by then I had been in the CIA. Well, by the time I got to Pakistan as the head of counterterrorism operations after 9/11, I'd been in the CIA almost 13 years, and I was responsible for all counterterrorism operations in the country. Al-Qaeda was running out of Afghanistan into Pakistan because we were bombing the daylights out of them, and so my job was to find them and grab them and then just hold them or send them to trial was the original idea. And we were planning at the time for our first big name capture, right? Bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri. We had killed Mohammed Atef. He was the head of what they called military affairs for Al-Qaeda. We killed him at Tora Bora. But then there was Abu Zubaydah. And then there was this unknown person that we later learned was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So we were looking for any of these 4 or 5 people. And then there were others, those responsible for the embassy bombings in Africa, the USS Cole bombing. So it just so happened that in February of 2002, we got a lead on Abu Zubaydah. And we captured him. It took us 6 weeks to track him down. And we were close a couple of times. Close where we would bust down the door and there's like an uneaten, like half-eaten sandwich on the counter, a cigarette still burning. Sometimes we were a day or two behind him, but he knew we were looking and he knew we were close. So we finally got him. And then the question is, what do you want to do with him? And they told me, hang on to him. We're going to send out a plane and we'll take it from there. So they did. And I wasn't cleared to know what they were going to do with him, just like the guys on the plane weren't clear to know who it was we had captured and why they were taking this guy, where they were taking him. But
Is that all just need to know?
Yeah, that's all need to know. In fact, when I got on the plane, 3 FBI agents and I picked him up on this gurney and carried him onto the plane. We had to stand him up and maneuver him onto the plane, then we laid him across the luggage rack at the back and tied him down. And one of the guys on the plane, he was dressed completely in black with a black hood on. And he says, "John?" And I said, "Who are you?" And he lifts up his mask and he's an old boss of mine. And I said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He said, "Oh, I came to take your prisoner." I said, "Where are you taking him?" And he said, "I can't tell you. You don't have a need to know." I said, "No, that's cool." He said, "Who is he anyway?" I said, "Oh, dude, I'm sorry. You don't have a need to know." He says, "Yeah, fair enough. Okay, safe travels." And then, your job is to take him from point A to point B, not to become his friend and, get his family story. Just like my job is to catch him and hand him over to the next guy, and it's none of my business where he's going. And so when I got back to headquarters in May of that year, I was just standing in this sandwich line at the CIA cafeteria, and one of the senior guys from the Counterterrorism Center came up to me, very casually, and he said, "Oh, hey, I'm glad I ran into you. I meant to ask you, do you want to be certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques?" And I had never heard that term before. This was May of 2002. I said, "Enhanced interrogation techniques? What's that mean?" And he goes, "We're going to start getting rough with these guys." Like that. And I said, "What's that mean?" So he describes these 10 techniques. And I said, "I don't know, man. That sounds like a torture program." And he said, "It's not a torture program. We got it cleared by the Justice Department, and the president signed it." He says, "Think about it." I said, "Yeah, give me an hour. I need an hour to think about it." I walked out of the cafeteria. I went up to the 7th floor, which is the executive floor. And there was a very, very senior officer up there for whom I had worked 10 years later in the Middle East. Knocked on his door, no appointment or anything. And I said, "Hey, I need some advice. I was just asked if I wanted to be trained in these enhanced interrogation techniques. What do you think of that?" And he said, "First of all, let's call a spade a spade." He said, "This is a torture program. They can use whatever euphemism they want, but this is a torture program, and torture is a slippery slope." He said, "You know how these guys are. Somebody's going to be a cowboy, they're going to go overboard, and they're going to kill a prisoner. And when that happens, there's going to be a congressional investigation, then there's going to be a Justice Department investigation, and somebody's going to go to prison. Do you want to go to prison?" I said, "No, I don't want to go to prison." As it turned out, I was the only person who went to prison, but I said, "No, I don't want to go to prison." I went back downstairs. I said, "Listen, I have a moral and ethical problem with this. I think it's illegal, and I don't want any part of it." The funny thing is, I had just captured Abu Zubaydah, who we believed was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. And I got passed over for promotion. And the reason I got passed over, they said, was because I turned down the training. The head of the Counterterrorism Center said in my promotion panel that I had displayed a shocking lack of commitment to counterterrorism. And then the guy who had given me the advice saw that my name wasn't on the promotion and he promoted me out of cycle. So I realized then I was up against something that was going to be tough. And then there was a psychiatrist at the agency whom I had known for years. We were in the same men's group, we went to the same church, and he happens to be both a brigadier general in the Army and a CIA psychiatrist. And he said to me one day, "Buddy, you know they call you the human rights guy behind your back." And I said, "Yeah, I don't care." And he said, "You know that's not a compliment, right?" And I said, "Steve, they're wrong about this, and I'm right about it." I said, I'm comfortable with the decision that I made. And I just left it at that. I didn't realize, though, how much I had pissed them off until later on.
So all you had done essentially was stand up for your beliefs, your morals, your ethics, and the law. And you said, "I don't want to participate in anything that I know to be illegal."
That was the start. Listen,
But you're standing out against the group.
And I was the only one. I'm almost ashamed to tell you that they asked 14 of us if we wanted to be trained in enhanced interrogation techniques. I was the only one who said no.
Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to use them. You were just going to be trained in them.
No, they were to use.
But you would be required to use these techniques?
Mm-hmm.
So if you were not trained in them, then what would happen? Would that preclude you from ever being involved in any sort of a questioning, interrogation?
Yes, which is funny for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was no such thing at the time as an interrogation class, right? The FBI has deep, years-long interrogation classes. We never had to interrogate anybody. And in fact, when we started capturing prisoners in Pakistan in January of 2002, I'm like, well, what do you want me to ask him? I cabled headquarters. We caught this guy. What do you want me to ask him? Oh, you'll figure it out. Just go with it. I'm like, okay. So I was working with the Pakistani intelligence service, and I said, listen, I'm usually the good cop. You want to be the bad cop? And he's like, yeah, I'll be the bad cop. So we bring the prisoner out. We're sitting there looking at him. I said, what's your name? He's like, screw you. The Pakistani whacks him across the face. So I say again, what's your name? Listen, buddy, just give me your name. My friend here, he's not in a very good mood. He's not a very nice guy. Just tell me what your name is. Come on. And then they tell you their name.
Stanley.
Yeah.
So what exactly, did you know what enhanced interrogation techniques they were going to implement?
Oh yeah, that day in the cafeteria, my colleague explained it in great detail. And a lot of these techniques are not torture, right? If I grab you by the lapels and say, doggone you, answer my question, that's not torture. Or the first one was called the belly slap, or the intention slap was another way they called it, where I smack you in the belly, it makes a cracking sound, maybe it leaves a handprint. It's a little bit embarrassing. That's not torture. But then it graduated quickly to things like waterboarding, which everybody knows about, but there were techniques that were, in my view, that were worse than waterboarding. Like, for example, there was the cold cell. So they strip you naked, they chain you to an eye bolt in the ceiling, so you can't lay or kneel or sit or anything. You can't get comfortable in any way. And they chill the cell to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then every hour somebody comes in and throws a bucket of ice water in. We killed people with that. The Justice Department never said we could kill people. And when we would kill people, at least two with that technique that
Just
the
from
agents
hypothermia?
took from hypothermia.
And there wasn't a protocol in place to stop them from dying?
No. There was later, but in those early days, no. Later, we always had a doctor on scene. Like, for example, with Abu Zubaydah, his heart actually stopped during a waterboarding session, and the doctor revived him just so he could be tortured more. It's like, yeah, didn't the Germans do that? Come on now. Now we're doing it? That's not cool.
Is there any other way that, like, I know that MK Ultra experimented with a lot of drugs and a lot of different techniques involved in whether it was trying to find the truth out of people or getting people to commit acts. Did they ever implement something where they would give someone something?
That's a good question. The short answer is yes. Not in the very beginning, but they were working with things like truth serum and different drugs like relaxation drugs, gabapentin, stuff like that to sort of get you to open up. But remember too that the agency got in such trouble in 75 and 76 before the Church Committee and the Pike Committee about MK Ultra that as soon as Senator Church said, don't destroy the documents, the director went right back to headquarters and ordered them to destroy everything. And so only about 20% of the MK Ultra documents still exist. So we don't really know exactly what it was that was learned in that program, like what worked and what didn't work. We hear these stories about, dosing the fog-laden air of San Francisco just to see if everybody gets sick. We've all read the stories about this bakery in France where apparently we dosed the bread and everybody in the village went nuts. But we don't really have fulsome documentation that we could have used operationally while interrogating prisoners.
So just to avoid prosecution, they figured out a way.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And so then whatever they did learn was lost.
Yeah, it's lost.
If there was something, whether it's MDMA or
Right.
LSD or whatever they give people.
They worked with LSD for 20 years at least. at least 20 years. You know, it was an operation, it was a sub-operation of MK Ultra, where they rented a safe house in San Francisco. They recruited a bunch of hookers and had them go out and pick up Johns, bring them back to the safe house where they thought they were going to get laid, dose them with LSD, and then interrogate them and try to get them to give up their deepest secrets. It's like, what do you do?
Climax.
Yeah, Midnight Climax, exactly. It's like, what? Nobody's agreed to do this. You haven't informed them properly. These are American citizens. You can't just take people off the streets and force LSD down their
Well, they
throats.
were running the hate aspect for minutes until right after a month after Chaos by Tom O'Neill came out. Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah, my
Craziness.
my wife's mom went there. She was a hippie in San Francisco.
Wow.
She went to the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic.
Oh.
It was run by the CIA, which is so crazy, and it's totally connected to Manson and the Manson.
Oh yeah,
family.
Manson. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Manson was a part of it as well.
It's so nuts, and they wouldn't have even known about that until they found the stash of documents and connected them all together.
And just think of what's been destroyed.
Right.
What we could have made.
Exactly. We only know a small fraction of what was done. So is it a case of just they're not elected, they're put into power, presidents come and go, and over the course of their career, 20 years plus, they just have so much power and so much ability to get things done that they just bypass the law?
I think that's the whole story, right there in a nutshell. When I was there, I remember being shocked by some of the old-timers who had been there for as long as 40 or 42 years. There was one in particular, he was the National Intelligence Officer for Warning. So he was the one that was supposed to say, you know, I'm worried about what Libya is going to look like 10 years from now. And then somebody writes a paper about it. He had been there for 42 years. He had to get a waiver from the director because he had aged out. Well, these guys make no secret of their belief that they can outweigh pretty much any president. Presidents come and go, and these guys are there forever. And so if the president wants them to do something that they don't want to do, they just slow roll it. Just wait until he leaves. And that's the end of it. You know, that's why I say, I've said this in interviews a lot. There is a deep state. You don't have to call it the deep state if you don't want to. You can call it the state. You can call it the federal bureaucracy. You can call it whatever you want. The fact is, it exists. And it's unelected. And it's generally unaccountable to anybody. And they just wait for the president to leave if they don't want to.
So you find out about this torture program, you won't participate, so that puts you on the outs. And when do you know this is going to be like a significant problem?
You know, honestly, I didn't know until well after I left the agency. You know, once I turned this down, and I got this out-of-cycle promotion for the Abu Zubaydah operation, I was named executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. And in that position, you have access to literally everything that the CIA is doing around the world. And so I'm reading these cables coming back from the Secret Service, and people are saying, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. Nobody said we're going to torture people. I quit. And then they come home. Or there was a secretary who fainted once when she happened to be in the room while Abu Zubaydah was being tortured, and she curtailed her assignment. That means she sends a cable to headquarters saying, I'm coming home, I'm not doing this anymore. That is a career-ending decision to curtail an assignment. And I remember thinking, so I'm the only one who thinks this is illegal. Certainly somebody's going to come out and say something. And nobody did.
This episode is brought to you by Happy Dad Hard Seltzer. Most hard beverages overcomplicate everything. Happy Dad keeps it simple. Low carbonation, gluten-free, and only 100 calories in every can. Barbecues, golf rounds, hanging by the pool, chilling after work. Happy Dad is perfect for whatever you're up to. Everyone is drinking all these skinny cans loaded with sugar, but Happy Dad only has 1 gram of sugar in a normal can. You can grab a variety pack featuring lemon lime, watermelon, pineapple, and wild cherry. And don't sleep on the great collab with Death Row Records. It's a fan favorite for a reason. Happy Dad is now available nationwide in the USA and Canada. Go to your local liquor store or visit happydad.com. For a limited time, use the code ROGAN to buy one Happy Dad trucker hat and get one free. Enjoy a cold Happy Dad. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly. Happy Dad Hard Seltzer NT Malt Alcohol, Orange County, California.
Like, what are the techniques that they were using that were causing her fate?
The big ones were waterboarding, the cold cell, and sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation doesn't sound like any big deal. And when that finally leaked, Don Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, made a statement that still kind of sticks in my mind. He said, there is no such thing as sleep deprivation. He said, I have a stand-up desk in my office. I don't even have a chair in my office. And sometimes I'll work 24 hours and then into the next day, 36 hours. But that's not what we're talking about here. We know from the American Psychological Association that people begin to lose their minds at day 7 with no sleep. And they begin to die. Their organs begin to shut down at day 9. But the CIA was authorized to keep people awake for 12 days. And that was another thing that caused prisoners to just die. They would have heart failure, you know?
How'd they keep them awake?
You chain them to that eyeball ceiling again. You have these industrial strength lights on them 24 hours a day and like death metal 24 hours on volume 11. And they just can't sleep because if they collapse, they'll pull their arms out of their sockets. They're chained to that eyebolt. It's bad. And then when people would die, they would just dig a hole next to the interrogation building, put them in the hole, cover it up, and then bring the next guy.
No report, no nothing.
Nothing. There was one guy they reported on, and headquarters wrote back and said, just put him on ice until we can figure out what to do. And they literally just put him in a bathtub and filled it with ice. And then just decided a couple days later he started to turn. We should probably bury this guy. Wow. Yeah, it was ugly. And the Justice Department never said anything about that. They're like, oh, listen, you can do these techniques, and if you kill him, just bury him out back. Nah, that wasn't the approved operation.
Was any of it effective? Like, was there any actionable information?
That's the worst part of this. No, none of it was effective. You know, I say this all the time, Joe. It's like a kick in my gut to have to compliment the FBI. But if there's one thing that the FBI is really good at, it's interrogations. They've been doing interrogations effectively since the Nuremberg trials in 45 and 46. These guys know what they're doing. And so with Abu Zubaydah as an example, we captured Abu Zubaydah. And normally overseas, the CIA has primacy. Domestically, the FBI has primacy. But 9/11 was still an open criminal investigation, and so we sent Abu Zubaydah out to the secret site, and the FBI took over. The CIA was furious about this, but there was an FBI agent by the name of Ali Soufan who did exactly as he was trained to do, and he began to engage Abu Zubaydah in a conversation. And Abu Zubaydah just gave him the silent treatment for weeks. This went on for weeks. But you go in, you offer him a cup of coffee, you offer him an orange. If he's cooperative, you'll let him write a letter to his mother, whatever. And finally he opened up and he gave us actionable intelligence that saved American lives. And I'll give you 2 examples. Number 1, we had no idea what the Al-Qaeda wiring diagram looked like. We knew it was bin Laden and Zawahiri, and then we just didn't know what the organization was like, how it was built. So he explained to us how each one of these cells all around the world was stovepiped, compartmentalized. So cell A had no idea what cell B was doing. And Ali said, as an example, if you want to do an operation in, let's say, Dusseldorf, how would you do it? And Abu Zubaydah said, well, there's this guy, Muhammad, and here's his phone number. Muhammad lives in Dusseldorf, and he has a cousin, Abdullah, and Abdullah has access to weapons. And here's Abdullah's email. And then Abdullah's got a friend, Rashid. They meet at the coffee shop, and Rashid has access to explosives. And then we're able to call the Germans and say, hey, listen, you have a serious problem in Dusseldorf, and here's what you need to do. And then they kick down the door and they grab these guys. That saved lives. The other thing that he told us, and he laughed actually, because Ali didn't know what the heck he was talking about. He was talking about Mukhtar, a guy using the nom de guerre Mukhtar. We knew from our own files that there was this guy out there who called himself Mukhtar, who was a very bad guy. In 1996, he had initiated something called the Bojinka operation. It was supposed to be carried out in the Philippines, and the idea was to hijack as many as 14 747s and then fly them into buildings all up and down the west coast of the United States. It just so happened that one day, Mukhtar, working on his plan, his diabolical terrorism plan, he went out to have lunch. And when he went out to have lunch, the cleaning lady came in to clean the apartment, and she sees all this stuff laid out. She said, that looks like a terrorist attack being planned. She calls the cops. The cops come and say, ooh, this looks like a terrorist attack. We better call the Philippine Intelligence Service. They come and look at it, and somebody says, we should probably call the CIA on this. And so we confiscated everything, and Bojinka was disrupted. Well, it's crazy.
Clean.
You never know. You just never know.
It's just crazy that he was leaving plans, just laying around.
Like thinking nobody's gonna come, nobody's gonna see it, and then he ran out. So we knew there was this guy out there planning this big thing, and his name was Mukhtar. Abu Zubaydah laughed at us and said, "You don't know who Mukhtar is?" And Ali said, "No." And Abu Zubaydah said, "His name is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed." That's the first time we ever heard that name. We didn't have any documents in any files that were about any guy named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. But that was the very first time we were able to piece it all together. And it was thanks to Abu Zubaydah, in turn, thanks to Ali Soufan's treating Abu Zubaydah with respect. But on August the 1st, 2002, George Tenet went to the White House, and he asked the president, for reasons that had never been made clear, he asked the president to turn over primacy to the CIA. He did that. And the CIA director, Robert Mueller, to his credit, he knew exactly what was going to come. Not only withdrew FBI personnel from the secret site, he withdrew FBI personnel from the country that the secret site was in. And within 12 hours, the CIA began to torture Abu Zubaydah. He went completely silent and remained silent. And then the FBI went back to the president and said, look, the CIA is screwing this up. We were getting all this intelligence from this guy. Now he won't say anything. And we're putting him in a coffin. And we heard that he had this irrational fear of bugs. So we pour a box of cockroaches on him in the coffin and close up the coffin. And we would open it up every couple days to change his diaper and give him food. And he went nuts. And so finally, the White House turns everything back over to the FBI. It takes Ali months to get him to talk again. And he starts talking again. And he's given us more and more information about Al-Qaeda operations in Malaysia and anti-Australia operations and what's going on in Canada and how Al-Qaeda is able to move across borders between Europe and Asia. And then the CIA comes back in again and starts torturing him again. And screwed it all up.
But why would they do that? I don't understand. If you're getting information, why would they decide to ramp it up and torture?
I think for a couple of reasons. I think we should never underestimate the motivating factor of a desire for revenge. Right? This was the worst intelligence failure in the history of the country. 3,000 people died because we hadn't done our jobs. So that was one thing. The other thing is the CIA had entered into an agreement with these two contract psychologists, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessup, in October of 2001. And they said, hey, we've reverse engineered the military's SEER program, and we think this would be an effective but harsh interrogation technique. And so we were chomping at the bit at the agency to try this thing out without using the word torture. We paid those guys $108 million to say, oh, we think you should torture people. Here are the torture techniques. Just let us know when you want us to start. $108 million for that. And so we thought, well, we've already spent the money, and we really do want revenge on these guys. So, okay, let's just go for it. I think that's what it was.
Wow. So, how did you get in trouble?
I waited for somebody to say something about torture, and nobody did. And then I got divorced. My kids moved with my ex-wife to Ohio, and they were little. They needed their dad, so I decided I'm going to leave the agency, go into the private sector so I can see my boys on the weekends. And still I waited for somebody to say something, and nobody did. Now, I wish that I could tell you that I stood up and I took a stand, and that wasn't it at all. I got a call in December of 2007. So now I'm out of the agency 3.5 years. I got a call from Brian Ross at ABC News. And he said that he had a source who said I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said, that is absolutely false. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I said, I've never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or any other prisoner. And he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. Well, I had never spoken to a reporter before. I didn't know that was a reporter's trick. So I said, I'll think about it. In the meantime, President Bush, I remember it being a Monday, President Bush gives a press conference. And the International Committee of the Red Cross had said in a paper that the CIA was torturing prisoners. Human Rights Watch said CIA is torturing prisoners, and Amnesty International said CIA is torturing prisoners. So a reporter says, look, all these international human rights organizations are saying that the CIA is torturing its prisoners. What's your response to that? And the president looks right in the camera and he goes, we do not torture. And I said to my wife, who was a senior CIA officer, I said, he is a bald-faced liar. He's looking the American people right in the eye, and he's lying to us. And she said, are you surprised? Well, then on Wednesday, 2 days later, he gets another similar question. And he said that there is no torture. I knew he was lying. And then another 2 days later, it's Friday. And he's walking from the south portico of the White House to the helicopter to go to Camp David for the weekend. And a reporter shouts another question about torture. And this time he stops and he turns and he says, well, if there is torture, it's because of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, Brian Ross's sources at the White House, and they're going to pin this on me. So I called Brian Ross and I said, I'll give you your. And I decided in the whatever it was.
Because they were said human rights guy, so
Yeah.
they were going to be a patsy.
And I was not
You just
willing.
assumed that
I assumed, yeah.
That's just your experience with the organization.
Oh, yeah. They're going to leave somebody out to dry to protect themselves. So I called Brian Ross. I said, I'll give you your interview. And I decided that whatever he was going to ask me, and he never told me in advance what he was going to ask me, I was just going to tell the truth. And so he met me at the ABC News studios on DeSale Street in Washington. And I said 3 things in that interview that changed the course of the rest of my life. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of any rogue officer. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. And then, as you can imagine, within 24 hours, the CIA files what's called a crimes report against me with the FBI, saying that I had revealed classified information. The FBI then investigates me from December of 07 to December of 08. And then they send my attorney a letter called a declination letter, declining to prosecute. They said that they completed their investigation, that the information was already out there because of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Red Cross. But most importantly, torture is a crime, and it is illegal to classify a crime for the purpose of keeping it from the American people. So no charges. My wife and I went out to celebrate. That night we went to dinner. 3-4 weeks later, Barack Obama becomes president. And he names John Brennan. At first, CIA left, but the liberals went crazy because Brennan was one of the fathers of the church. Everybody seems to forget that now. And we can get to that. But he then named Brennan the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism. Brennan immediately sends a memo to Eric Holder, the new Attorney General, and says, talking about me, charge him with espionage. And Holder writes back, we got these memos in discovery when I went to trial. Holder writes back and says, my people don't think he committed espionage. And then Brennan writes back and says, charge him anyway and make him defend himself. So they charged me with 5 felonies, 3 counts of espionage. They waited until I went bankrupt, and then they dropped the espionage. Yeah.
Oh, God, that's so gross.
That's Washington.
It's just so hard to believe that the United States of America government works like that. I believe it.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to swallow.
There's a book by Harvey Silverglate, who's a professor of law at Harvard University. The book is called 3 Felonies a Day. And he says that we are so over-regulated, so over-criminalized in this country that the average American on the average day, going about his or her normal daily business, commits 3 felonies every single day. So if they want to get you, they're going to get you. And there's nothing you can do to protect yourself.
So what was Brennan's beef with you? Was it just because of the fact that you did that interview, or was there underlying tension?
We were never pals. I've known John Brennan for 35 years. We never really cared for each other. To tell you the truth, I thought the guy was in over his head intellectually. When I first started there, he was a deputy group chief. He was a GS-15, nobody, journeyman, first line, second line manager. No big deal. There are hundreds of them. And he worked for this really wonderful woman, a great intellect, named Martha Kessler. And Martha was so highly respected. She had written this book. I still remember the title, called Syria, Fragile Mosaic of Power. And when you got hired, you got her book, and you had to read the book. Because, this is what we do. This is the perfect example of what we do. So he was her deputy. One day, he went to her, and he said, Martha, I've been your deputy for X number of years. I think I'm ready for promotion into the senior intelligence service. And Martha said, and I just talked to her daughter a couple of weeks ago about this. Martha said, not only will you never be a member of the senior intelligence service, I don't even want you working for me anymore. You're fired. Well, you're not really fired at the CIA. If you're fired, that means you have 6 weeks to walk the halls and find another job. If you can't find another job in 6 weeks, then they escort you to your car, they take your badge, and, so long. Good luck. Well, the normal job turnover is in the summertime.